for the inspiring talk. We'd like to remind you of the hashtag APF20 GoFundMe drive. Simply click on the button and make sure that you donate. You'll find out, of course, as you scroll through on the web platform. And also remember to share this information with your network as well. This initiative will, of course, only do well with all the support that it can get. Please do ensure to click join session when a session starts and click the leave button when a session ends so that you can join the next session that follows that one. But I'm sure, if you are already in this one, it means that you are very well acquainted with this process already. You're welcome to post your comments on the chat box alongside the sessions. And in that way, you're part of the dialogue, part of the ongoing and growing conversation too. And we'd love to hear from you and to hear your input as we go through these conversations. We introduced our plenary of the next conference. And with this time around, of course, the theme is Resetting Africa, Seizing Opportunity in a Pandemic. Our moderator for the session is Yinka Adigeko, the African editor, or in fact, the Africa editor at Quartz. Over to you.
Thank you very much to our voice. Welcome everyone to our panel. I'm very excited because we are going to talk, speak very broadly about some of the big challenges that we're facing and how we can approach it as a continent. The panel is titled Resetting Africa, Seizing Opportunities in a Pandemic. And it seems obvious to all of us. I listened to the excellent keynote interview with Mo Ibrahim, and he raised the most important point, and it's something that we cover at Quartz a fair bit, that the biggest issue here on the continent has been less about the pandemic itself and more about the economy. It's been devastating for pretty much all economies, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. And it also means there are ways in which we can rethink how we rebuild economies in a sustainable fashion, to be inclusive, to take advantage of technologies. And this is why we have this excellent panel who are just like a perfect mix of people who are looking at the challenges from a range of different angles. I'm going to introduce them. First, we have Tsitsi Masiyiwa. She is the board chair of the African Philanthropy Forum and also the co-founder of the Higher Life Foundation. Hi, Tsitsi. Then we have Uma Saidi from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Hi, Uma. And we have Mavis from the Africa Center for Economic Transformation. Have I got that right? Is it Economic Transformation? Yes. Okay. So let me start with you, Tsitsi, just to talk a little bit about how you're kind of rethinking this moment, especially in terms of the work you do, both with the APF and with your foundation. Just in broad terms, how this moment has changed the way you think about supporting institutions and governments and people around the continent.
Thank you very much, Yinka. Firstly, I want to say, I think earlier when we had a conversation, we said the word opportunity is not quite what you want to throw in there when you're talking about the pandemic. It's affected all of us in a very profound way. And yes. As the APF, we are a platform that galvanizes on philanthropists from across the continent, irrespective of size. And so we get together, we network, we collaborate, but primarily Our mission is to use our philanthropy to provide a platform to bring positive change development in partnership with the public sector, other NGOs, and the private sector. So we promote, we train, we talk about philanthropy so that people realize it's less about the amount of money one has and more about, as we create wealth, irrespective of the size of the pocket, how do we use those resources efficiently in a way that does not replicate what is already being done by the government or replaces the private sector, but finding where are the gaps, where we can take, where high risk money is needed in order to stimulate and catalyze development that is long-term and that is sustainable. So that's the kind of philanthropy that we focus on. We represent all 54 countries on the continent, and we have various programs we hold from, we used to have face-to-face regional conferences, plus training programs, plus our key conference, which this year we are doing online. So African Philanthropy Forum it's a community of members, and we hope as a result of these discussions we're having, that more people will join us and become part of a growing and important voice in development on our continent. Now, in terms of the impact has been shocking. We've been shocked just at how unprepared we were in terms of what to do in the face of a pandemic. What has been very obvious is that we don't share information. So pandemics have happened in different regions and in different countries.
Yes.
But the way we have treated it is happening in that region. It's not affecting us. So we don't need to know how do you confront and deal with a pandemic. It's also just shown how fragile our economies are. We already knew that, but the fragility is even more pressing than ever before. If you live on $1 a day or $2 a day, it means if there's a lockdown, a shutdown, you have no income for tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And that has been so evident across the board. So it's really been a radical wake-up call for all of us that we need to revisit how we look at philanthropy. We need to be more bullish. We can't wait to, especially as Africans, to become philanthropists after we've retired, when we've made money. As we make money, irrespective of the amount of money, we have to find what are the programs that we can invest in order to catalyze change. Also, what has also been very evident is how limited the resources are. Every country has a crisis. So ordinarily, you would go to your traditional partners and donors to look for funding. I must say, there's been a lot of generosity from within the continent, from local philanthropists, as individuals or as corporates, as foundations, etc. But it's even more pressing than ever before, the need for us to redefine what giving and philanthropy means and how we take on board the pressing challenges on the African continent and drive the process instead of waiting for the driving of change to come from either from donors or from other philanthropists. So in a nutshell, I think that's how I see where we are at the moment.
Yeah, that's fantastic intro. I mean, so many things, so many threads I want to pull there because it's the topics we all think about fairly often. But let me just to bring out other panelists in, and I'll go to you, Mavis, to talk a little bit about the economic challenge right now and what the priorities are in terms of the problems that we've seen. Because just like Tissy raised there, we all knew we had challenges, but this moment has really exposed the fragility of our economies in ways perhaps we may not even have expected.
Thank you very much, Yinka, and thank you to the APC for inviting me to join this panel this afternoon. I think one of the things that we have learned from COVID is the importance of not just growth on the continent, but growth with depth, as Asset would normally say. So we need to grow in a way that ensures that we are diversifying our economies. We need to ensure that we are able to export and compete within the global economy. We need to ensure that our productivity levels are competitive globally. We are able to use technology, and we are investing in the kind of human capital that is becoming more and more critical. So we talk about a youth bulge. We need to stop talking about a youth bulge and start to talk about the dividend, the demographic dividend for Africa. And what we have learned with the pandemic is that whilst the continent has been growing, it hasn't been growing with depth. And as a result, the impact on us has been a lot higher. And fortunately, we haven't seen the health impact or the levels of the health impact that were initially projected. But I think even we underestimated the economic impact on the continent. So for the first time, we are going to see our economies actually grow at a much lower pace, and at a pace slower than what we did in 2019 and what we did in, and it's going to be also slower than population growth. So for example, we were projecting that we were going to see economic recovery to, at 2.1%, which is much lower than what we had projected earlier on. So what—
For 2020.
For 2020, and it's going to be, it's projected to be 2.1 in 2021 compared to 2.4 in 2019. Now that 2.1 in,
now.
yes, we are negative. So that 2.1 in 2021 is lower than population growth, which is not overall a good thing for a young continent. Having said that, we are beginning to see certain countries doing better than envisaged. So countries like Ghana are projected to actually see a positive growth in 2020, which we had assumed that most countries would see a negative growth in 2020. So it's not all bad, but it's also not all good. For me, a crisis should never be wasted. So the question for us is, how do economies grow and take advantage of this crisis to grow with depth, as we would encourage countries to look at? And we can talk a bit more about the ways in which we can grow with depth as we rebuild back better as a continent.
Yeah, we should definitely come back to that. Thanks for that intro, Maurice. Uma, I really want to get that back to that point about how philanthropy is likely to be reinvented, so to speak, in this time, and which is what we had there earlier from Sisi. What are the kind of and opportunities, as has been said, it's not the ideal word, but what are we going to see in this moment? What are the changes we're going to see that you're thinking about at the Gates Foundation, and just in broad terms?
Thank you very much, Yinka. I'm very pleased to be in this panel with Sisi and Mavis, but let me also take the opportunity to thank the Africa Philanthropy Forum for the wonderful work that they've been doing. And also, since we're talking about African philanthropists, I cannot help but really convey my gratitude to the Masiyiwas in general. Sisi may not probably see all the details of what I'm talking about because I've been spending a lot of time on the MSP, but this family has been an inspiration to me. In my second year at the foundation, looking at not only what they are doing in their home country, but regionally with the Africa Medical Supplies Platform and the Donor Collective, and I'll talk about them a little bit later. But you're right, it's very difficult to talk about opportunities. And probably the best way to frame it is to think about what can be leveraged and what has actually happened that we are looking at, and that could be good lessons for the future and that we could work on to be better prepared. I heard you, Mavis, talking about that preparation, and you talked about the economics impact. But one figure I just wanted to share, which is really worrisome when we think about even economics. That's a field I used to be in, but now I'm in a totally different field. We produce our Goalkeepers report every year. And one thing I just couldn't believe in looking at, after 20 years of consecutive progress in reducing poverty, COVID hit, and basically those who are below the poverty line, i.e. $1.90 equivalent a day, have reduced by 7%. Now, the health impact also have been catastrophic. Maybe when you look at the COVID numbers that people talk about, the continent may have been hit less than was projected, but think about malaria, HIV. The progress of 5 years have been wiped out instantly, the progress that we did to fight against. And then another figure, and then I'll get to the point too. Immunization, we all know, everybody's waiting for that vaccine. We all know that vaccines save lives. In terms of immunization, the progress that has been done in our countries for 25 years have been stopped in only 25 weeks. So it is really a bad situation, but what could be leveraged? The first thing to me is the recognition that we are all connected, whether we like it or not, whether you live here or in developing countries, because global health is as strong as our most vulnerable community. COVID anywhere is actually COVID everywhere. Talk about border closing, we talk about all of these sort of things that, you know, there was a time when we were in Africa associated with a particular challenge, and then perhaps there's not enough investment in that particular challenge. But in this case, it is a challenge that touches the whole world. The second is a bit of a learning from the past, present, and how we think about building the future that you talked about. And as we look at how this pandemic has evolved, something that we call the trade-off triangle, and you cannot pick one of them. It's all three. It's the fight against COVID. It's the life versus livelihood, economic part of it, and then the essential health services, which have been neglected because people were just focused on COVID, and then in the background, other things were just happening. So that is a very important lesson that, you know, that you can leverage for the future. But then also a few things that are, you know, I would say a bit hopeful when I think about investments in R&D and health systems in general, in how things are unfolded, that you can leverage that also for the future. You know, there's a diagnostic called Lumira, which we are hoping to bring to the platform I was talking about earlier. This is for rapid diagnostic. And so obviously everybody's doing research and trying to get these things out. So that one is the rapid test for COVID, but it can also be leveraged for the other very important other diseases that actually tend to kill more people in Africa. So that's something that could be leveraged for the future. There's also been a lot of work done on oxygen systems to basically support COVID patients. Well, those could be very useful also in the future, you know, to save lives with newborns and others who would be affected by that. And finally, I think about long-term investments in health. And this is where the Africa CDC comes in. It's unbelievable, just a few years ago, there was not, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was no Africa CDC. Can you actually believe that? And then Africa CDC was born through the support of the AU. The activities were not that really felt, but the minute the pandemic hit, people realized that something needed to be leveraged. And they are overwhelmed by people talking to them, trying to figure out how best to support them, giving them funding, listening to them. And in fact, this year, our foundation gave the Global Goalkeepers Award to the director of the Africa CDC, John Kangasong, because of the many things that he had to do working with the AU Special Envoys and many others. So this is a tool now that people know how valuable this tool is, and necessarily we need to invest in this tool. And then along those lines, there were a number of philanthropists, because you're talking about philanthropy, that really got together through what we call the donor collective. And in the middle of that, when I was talking about the Masivas earlier, they played the anchor role, bringing both African philanthropists and foreign philanthropists and others who care. So for me, when I talk about our role, it's all about collaboration. You know, I've been in the field of development for 3 decades. It is a crowded field. For me, it's all about everyone in that field playing their position in the right way and also collaborating. So we've been hit by many things, and as Sissy said earlier, this is the time to rethink that. Maybe I can just stop there, but this is just to give us a perspective of how far we've come, the challenges that we've had to face, and the things that we need to think about, even if you don't call it opportunity, leverage it for the future, because we will have to deal with, unfortunately, sadly, some situations that are probably similar. Hopefully not this kind of situation, because this is just unprecedented over.
Yeah, there's always going to be a need, and having these platforms and the kind of collaboration you talk about there is crucial. And I want to come back to that, because that's kind of one of the things we have on our agenda. But I'll come back to Sissy and just get you to also talk about, I don't want to overstate it and call it the reinvention, but just sort of, you might call it the refocus of how your platforms like yours, the ones you run privately, by that I mean your foundation, and the APF, and some of the excellent work that Uma brought up there that you've already been doing and getting people together. But to talk about this moment and how you're changing things and you know, enabling others to be more effective, as you started out talking about.
Sure. So there are a number of things that we have done. The firstly is shifting the mindset. That the problem is so massive, we cannot have an 8 to 5 attitude to work. So our team members understand we can rest 1 day, 6 days we need to work all round the clock. People are putting in 14, 16 hours a day because the situation is so desperate. What are they busy doing? We pivoted how we do our investments. For example, livelihoods, sustainable livelihoods is at the core, food security. So we identified low-cost training program that would quickly equip smallholder farmers with the skills to quickly go and increase production, food production on their plots. We identified a local organization in the past I would never have known. For a small investment of $50 and 1/6 of an acre, by planting maize, you are able to, the farmer is able to produce maize that will feed a family of 8 people for a whole year. Now that's something we'd never have known, but because of COVID, we had to go and look at, with the limited financial resources we can, what can we invest our limited resources in quickly that can really have big impact and touch as many lives as possible. So we have trained more than, right now we're probably on more than maybe 300 to 400 trainers who are training others. And we have a short window because the rains start in 2 to 3 weeks. So we've done that in the last 2 months to intensify training throughout the country to improve food productivity. Then secondly, Uma talked about the Center for Disease Control, the African CDC. Now that's the mother body. But for the CDC to be really effective, every country must have its own CDC. So, for example, in Zimbabwe, ours had fallen apart. So when we had Cyclone Idai, we invested in a CDC. So we took an old building, refurbished it, and put in information, equipment, staff, and then also because of, we've had a series of cholera outbreaks. So using information and data we have collected on cholera, we had an idea that if you have a disease outbreak, the likely hotspots are the same all the time. So we used mapping using technology because of the company, the sector in which our businesses are invested. And we're quickly able to map where the cholera outbreaks as the areas that are likely to have higher outbreaks of COVID. So by mapping, we did intensive programs in what is COVID, hand washing, distributed soap. We imported borehole equipment, water bowsers, water storage equipment to quickly educate and get water available. Now, how did we move the equipment? I also discovered something. You're in media. And honestly, if we have an opportunity to really bring out, to talk about the companies, what local companies are doing in our different countries. Just between South Africa and Zimbabwe, honestly, we don't need to import PPE from anywhere. There are companies that manufacture all the PPE that we need in a country that supposedly, to the outside world, looks like nothing happens in Zimbabwe. But we were able to identify local manufacturing companies that can provide the quality that is consistent with what we can afford. So we strengthened our own local, we call it Emergency Operations Center, which is the heartbeat where the COVID personnel would meet, organize their daily reports, collect data, disseminate information. So if we hadn't invested in that, I think as a country we would have struggled to have a place where people can meet and be able to talk about what the pandemic situation is and strategize real time. Another area we've invested in is, Uma talked about maternal health. We are just about to roll out a national training program to train cleaners, nursing assistants, nurses, doctors, specialists in upgrading their skills in order to ensure that the progress we've been able to make in maternal health, we don't lose. Of course, already the COVID has adversely affected that, but we are investing a lot of money in partnership with Elma Foundations, which I have to mention, they are an amazing partner to a lot of African countries. They've invested in different programs, including the CDC. So we've partnered with them to bring this training to village health workers, community health workers, so that when people have information, they know what to do in a crisis. Information really empowers. So leveraging our own mobile network, plus the ability to be able to be spread throughout the whole country, we found that it's doable, even in the midst of COVID, to reach out to people, to individuals, to communities, and be able to provide the vital information that they need to protect themselves or to be able to access training so that we can improve things like food security and minimizing COVID infection. There's quite a number of things that we've tried
projects.
out. Those are the key ones that we focused on.
No, that's fantastic work. I'm fascinated by it for a number of reasons. To just be really boring and technical about it, I'm just kind of fascinated by because sometimes people tell me, as a journalist, people talk to you about Africa, and there's so much corruption and there's all this and that and that. And my defense of Africa is often that I think corruption sometimes gets overrated. Our biggest problem is operational, how to move things, how to make things happen. And that sometimes that's actually the bigger challenge. And actually corruption probably comes out of the fact that we can't, things are not going to the places they're supposed to go and happening the way. So so all this to say, I'm curious about how much emphasis you already place, but how much more when you're probably speaking to other people who are trying to set up foundations and trying to do similar types of work, who are inspired by your work, where you place the emphasis for them in terms of making sure that it's not just about having a bunch of money, it's actually being able to pick the right challenges, but also operationally how you get these things done. Do you have any emphasis on that, or do you just think things come together? I mean, what's your experience? Do things come together because people care? I mean, I'm trying to see what the balance is there.
I think caring gets you through the door. So philanthropists and those who work with them generally are people who are caring, but it gets you through the door. But in order to do strategic philanthropy, it's important, planning is important, information is important, to the extent that you need qualified team members, staff, who know what they're doing, who can do research, strategize on what are the most cost-effective ways in which we can do our philanthropy, like I said earlier, without doing what governments can do or what the private sector can do. So it really takes good research, information, and respecting your knowledge that others have. I think one of the dangers with philanthropy is sometimes we can be emotional in our giving and then not really carefully think through that, am I doing what I'm doing in a sustainable manner? So what we have at APF is we have the tools available where those who are wanting to go into philanthropy, and irrespective of the size of money they would like to give, whether by starting their own foundations or partnering with others, we have tools that help you to do a step-by-step process. How do you register your foundation? How do you put a board together? How do you identify your staff? How do you identify the right program or project to put your money into? How do you find partners? On one of the days, I think on day 3, we are going to be talking about our systems change fellowship program, whereby we've identified, we've got so many talented change makers on the continent, social entrepreneurs and change makers. So we have a program where we are providing training to make sure that these fellows can scale their projects, that they are able to not only attract local philanthropists to partner with, but also to be able to bid for any of the funding that is available from international sources. So there's a lot of resources that are available and that allow any entrepreneur, philanthropist of any size to come in and be taken through a comfortable pace to get the tools and the skills that they require to actually start new programs or to partner with others in order to scale existing programs.
That's fantastic. Really, really, really interesting how you have to think about this to be effective. I want to come back to talking a bit more about the economy and Mavis. I really wanted to get into where you see. I mean, I don't know if this is something you do at the ACT, but where do you see economically the biggest opportunities going forward? Because that is one area we can definitely talk about opportunities that in terms of the reinvention and because that's kind of what this panel is about. It's about resetting. I kind of like the word reinvention, just coming back and experimenting, trying. It's exactly what DC was talking about there in the philanthropic context, but in the economic context, particularly for governments and for big organizations that are operating in these economies, where do you see the biggest opportunities for resetting?
Okay, so I'd like to pick up on a couple of things that both Uma and Tsitsi have talked about, which is we always knew that Africa was resilient, and we always knew that there were pockets of creativity in sub-Saharan Africa. The pandemic has released that on force. So when we think about innovation, when we think about digitalization, in spite of all the challenges, as Tsitsi said, you know, so many companies pivoted to produce PPEs. We saw companies pivoting to produce ventilators. We saw a company like Sen Vitali in Senegal, within a 3-month period, quickly develop their digital passports for patients so that you could track effectively within the country. So Africa is creative and Africa is resilient. However, this innovative and entrepreneurial spirit needs to be nurtured and supported. And I think this is where we go back to one of the points Tsitsi made earlier on, which is within the continent, philanthropists have an opportunity to support this innovation. Philanthropists are more likely to take risk investments than we would see in the formal financial institutions. So there's a real opportunity for nurturing and growing what has evolved out of COVID with this innovation and the growth in digitalization. So that's the first one. The second one is working in partnership with governments and large companies to really defragment the landscape. At the moment, there are over 620 tech hubs. They don't talk to each other. Government policy, it's not structured in such a way that they can build a single ecosystem. And I think, as Uma said, or the Gates Foundation always reminds us, this is the first of many pandemics that the world should be prepared for. We need to support the emergence of an ecosystem around innovation and digitalization with the right policies, with the right financial infrastructure, with the right human skills development, so that we can not just grow economically, but we can grow in a more resilient way. And we haven't talked about the crisis of gender. Gender is a fundamental challenge for us on the continent. We've seen the economic impact on sub-Saharan Africa, but when we look at the impact specifically on women, it's been larger than on men across the continent. So women have been affected as small and medium entrepreneurs. They've been affected as mothers at home. They've been affected as caregivers. And across the board, we are seeing women carry a larger burden of the economic downturn. However, we know the digital growth actually benefits women more within a given economy. So the more we can do to invest in digital innovation, the better. So that's the first thing. The second thing is regional integration. It is really important that what Africa has started on regional integration continues as we build back better. Africa CDC is being commended, not just on the continent, but globally. But the way the AU are working together, the AU envoys collaborating around negotiating global economic solutions for the continent, is being commended. Let's not make the Africa Continental Free Trade Area another tick box. Let's make it a platform that actually can invest in regional public goods. Not just a trade platform, but regional public goods around infrastructure, around digital, around technology. Countries should always ask themselves when they are looking at a policy, is this a national policy or is this something that actually we could work across on regionally, so that as a market, we are a much stronger market. And finally, I would say Africa has a lot of latent money that is being invested in US treasuries right now. It's time for that latent money to be invested on the continent to help build back better. So we are looking at, pension funds, alternative investment. The Alternative Investments in Africa Conference talked about how can the latent money that is being invested elsewhere, what is required? What are the policies? What are the innovations? What are the frameworks required for this money to be reinvested back into the continent? So those are the three things that I think we really need to work on.
Yeah. No, those were excellent. And I will say that I've never heard the phrase latent money when it comes to Africa and money outside the continent. It's always in the context of financial flows and illegal financial flows. Nobody ever says little money, which, but okay. No, but it's so many great points there. So many great points, and you know, I'm really glad that we're getting to that core of the idea of resetting and reinventing, experimenting. It's going to be it's going to be so it's going to be so crucial to the way things will change. I think we now have 10 minutes left, and I don't know if we are supposed to take questions, or if there's an ability to take questions. I think there was a suggestion earlier, but if not, we'll just carry on. And you know, because it's 10 minutes, we'll probably try and use the last 10 minutes to wrap up the key points we're trying to get across here. I'll come back to you, Omar. Umar, when we think because you brought this up, and I just want to touch on it a little bit more, but just use that as a way to sort of maybe make your final points about collaborations, about the need. And again, you know, maybe it's just talked about it there in a different context, but collaborations, why collaborations are going to be so important to the way Africa resets post the worst of the pandemic.
Well, collaboration is critical at every level. I mean, as I said earlier, you cannot isolate yourself from wherever you are, from what is happening to your neighbor, and even far away when I think about it. And so let me focus a little bit on just collaboration from the philanthropic perspective, since I'm in philanthropy now. So I'm not going to talk about my old hat and the things that I used to sort of do, and think about just a bit of lessons too. I think, as I say, it's a crowded field. It's very important that wherever and whatever you do, you look at the whole landscape. Not everyone would be able to solve all the problems. But when you're coming to solve the problems, never forget that you are doing it for a very particular stakeholder sitting in a very remote village, doing something very specific. And so this is all as I remind our colleagues and partners, it's not about you, it's about these stakeholders. And also, as you implement your program, again, about true collaboration that I believe for me gets you to impact, it has to be stakeholder owned and stakeholder basically led. In our context, I call it Africa owned and Africa led. You know, Sisi, when I talked about the work that's being done centrally, talked about the Africa CDC, I'm also thinking about the Africa Medical Supplies platform. There've been other platforms here around by very strong and well-known institutions, but some made it a point that, well, why don't we think about a tool that works for us, that we have that complementarity. So I don't think that it is a substitute, but it is a clear complementarity to some of the things that the needs that our countries have. You will remember, yes, we've evolved now, you can get PPP here, but there was a time when you couldn't find PPP anywhere. The supply shortage was here. If you order something, they won't even deliver to you because the next day somebody else has ordered at a higher price. It was very bad. So some African brains have gotten together, and you know who I'm talking about, I don't want to mention his name again, and others, and just came as well, let's come up with something that worked for our countries, and that was really endorsed by the African Union. Fast forward, that platform is now gone beyond the PPE stage. It has diagnostics that we need. It has therapeutics that we need. And now we also talking about vaccine. So again, I'm still gonna stay on the theme of collaboration that you mentioned. So if you take it globally, you know, I may be biased because we've been part of this effort, which is really the ACT accelerator. but it's an attempt to make sure access to COVID tools, to make sure that those therapeutics and vaccines, when they become available, don't just go to those who can actually pay. Even them too, if they were just limited to that, experience shows that you cannot isolate yourself from the rest of the world. So that is a worldwide collaboration that involved more than 150 countries, including those who just cannot afford to have the infrastructure needed to go and source, but they're working with others to do it. Obviously, if you go back and forth on it, there are things that you may want to improve here and there, but that's the idea, is to make sure that that collaboration takes you. Regionally, I talked about, obviously, the Africa Medical Suppliers Platform. I talked about Africa CDC, but I'm glad that—
Is this your last point, because we're running out of time?
Yeah, you know, we talked about, you know, preparedness for future pandemics. You have the EOCs in individual countries, but you also have the regional EOCs that are the subset beyond just the, what you call it, the Africa CDC. But then also locally, a lot of philanthropists, and that's really what I also want to applaud, have also stepped in. When I think about what is happening with the Solidarity Fund in South Africa, the fund in Nigeria, the COVID, you know, against COVID, which was also driven by the private sector. But if you think about it, behind that, you have a lot of philanthropists there, the likes of Dangote, etc. So my final word is that, yes, we are philanthropists coming from a different part of the world with a global reach. But what has been inspiring for me this year has been the role of African philanthropists who have taken this agenda, have made it an Africa-led and an Africa-owned agenda, not only in their country, but also crossing borders and going elsewhere to make a difference. So with that, I am really hopeful, and that's my last word. Sorry, I took a little bit more time.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much. Sorry to interrupt, but we were given strict instructions. Tissy, do you want to wrap up for us in terms of, because I think we've just got a couple more minutes on collaborating.
I just want to emphasize and amplify what my colleagues have said for Uma and also Mavis, that we don't have a choice. We have to collaborate. We have to trade amongst ourselves. We have to find sources of funding amongst ourselves. We have to respect. You know, I always say I remind my fellow philanthropists, especially from the West, when cholera or COVID does not know a US dollar, the difference between a US dollar, a Nigerian naira, a Zimbabwean RTGS, a South African rand, irrespective of the currency, all those currencies are needed to solve the problem. So if we understand that we have more in common, if we collaborate, if we join together, if we respect each other's uniqueness and also respect strengths, would solve our problems a lot quicker. There also needs to be a lot of humility in what we do. I think I love the point, Uma, that you mentioned, that a stakeholder-driven solution is always a lasting solution. Our communities know how to solve the problems. So if we get to where they are, listen to what they have to say, empathize with what they're going through, the solutions we'll come up with will be sustainable, they will be affordable. And we'll find a situation whereby there's less and less room for donor funding and more room for creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship and real wealth creation.
Excellent. Mavis, do you want to give us a last 1 minute?
Yes, so as the only non-philanthropist on the continent, I would just urge, as we go through the next couple of days and we think through the next 10 years of the continent, yes, we are starting with the stakeholder in the village, but we also need to think about the systems for long-term sustainability. So are there African institutions that can be supported to help governments build those fundamental systems so that they are sustainable, so that all this innovation, entrepreneurialism that we've seen is not a blip. Please, let's not make this response to this crisis a blip. Let's use it and really look for, it's a terrible thing to say, but let's not waste the crisis. Let's take these opportunities that have emerged and help build the systems that sustain and grow and take them to scale. And together, anything is possible on the motherland.
Okay. Excellent, excellent. You did it within time as well. You're a pro. Listen, it's such an honor to have the three of you to speak. I've learned so much listening to you, and I think there's so many smart ideas about collaboration and working together, and literally, like the panel says, resetting and inventing the system. But that particular word, working on systems, is the one I kind of am attracted to, because I think it's less about just, yes, sure, we need money, sure, we need, I don't know, PPE, whatever, what have you, but having the systems that can distribute these things and get them to people and keep them sustainable, so it's not a blip, just like the word, maybe just use that this can keep going, and then we can use these systems to do other things besides COVID or other diseases, that we can use them to enable education and other challenges that we face across the continent. But I remain optimistic as ever, especially when I've spoken to people like yourselves. And I thank you very much for your time. And I hope everyone enjoyed listening to you as much as I did. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yinka.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much to our speakers, and thank you to Yinka Adegoke for moderating the panel. We invite you to network, interact, and share ideas and experiences in the speed networking session that's up next. Go to the tab labeled networking during the speed networking session. Click on a table that has seats available. You will pop into a Zoom interface starting in the next few minutes. We welcome you to participate in these sessions by leaving your questions in the Q&A box. And of course, in that way, we'll all be richly blessed with your contributions as well. We'd like to remind you to donate and to share that information with your members as well. So please make sure that you still indeed donating there, and that you engage on that. In fact, in a short little while, maybe in tomorrow's session, I will share with you the update of how far we've come when it comes to that donation. The platform will be open for you to engage and network at any time. And of course, do continue your conversations on social media as well, using the hashtag APF2020. Today's session will close after the breakout sessions. A reminder that we will reconvene tomorrow at around 1 p.m. West African time. So please do set that reminder, and I hope to see you, or in fact, in this case, also engage with you tomorrow as well. The final inclusion in our program for day one welcomes you to join a breakout session of choice. So there's 3 to choose from, and that being a good thing. Breakout session number 1 it has the theme Preparing for the 4th Industrial Revolution. That should be a mouth-watering piece for all those interested in the 4th Industrial Revolution and all things related to the Internet of Things. So the moderator for that one, of course, will be Nyimpini Mabunda, the CEO of GE Southern Africa. Breakout session number 2 will be looking inwards, investing in medical research to drive local solutions to endemic diseases. The moderator for that will be Ebrima Sal, Executive Director of Trust Africa. Breakout session number 3 will have the theme Lessons from the Pandemic, how public-private partnership worked for impact. And the moderator for that will be Beginkosi Moyo from Center for African Philanthropy and Social Investments. Do enjoy.